Sometimes the person who is sabotaging your happiness in relationships is not your ex, not your parents, not the people out there who put you down. Sometimes the person sabotaging you is you. And the problem with growing up with neglect and abuse is that it can drive your thinking. It can constrict what you believe is possible for your life. And it can make you see only the worst, only what is ugly. Now, these are what I call trauma-driven beliefs. And you might be holding on to them because you think that they'll protect you. But what they really do is keep you isolated. They lead you away from the good choices and the positive changes and the healthy people who are capable of love. These are the ones you need in your life, right? If you're ever going to overcome what happened to you in the past. Now, it's true that the part of us that's designed to detect good people and to feel love and receive love can get so damaged by early trauma. And the more trauma happens, the greater the risk that we'll get kind of stuck in the pattern, falling only for unavailable people or for people who hurt us, or getting so lost in fantasy that we miss out on any kind of real fulfillment from dealing with real people. But the good news is, healing from past trauma has the potential to completely change the course of your life. And you might be really discouraged about that right now, and you just think, yeah, everybody says that, but how do you actually do that? But I'm here to give you real hope. There really are ways to start healing the wounds of the past, now that we know what their nature is. And if you aren't familiar with my work, you'll find the courses and materials where I teach that in the description section below. But stay with me for right now. You can do that later if you want. Healing begins when you make a decision to question your trauma-driven beliefs. Now, I've had a few miracles in my life. And the one that changed my life the most happened the day that I stopped having crappy relationships. And at the time, I had no idea why the same old hurtful and humiliating problems kept happening. And in fact, they were getting worse, and I couldn't make them stop, even when other things in my life were going well. Now, admitting that my old ideas and behaviors weren't working, like at all, was the very first thing I did that just put a crack in the door, like opened it just a little bit to transformation. And at that time, I was so unhappy, and I was so ashamed of the relationships I kept finding myself in. I could see, how other people were seeing me. And I couldn't really see a way forward. And I'd always thought that if I just met the right guy or looked prettier or changed one small thing about myself, that love could just kind of like show up in my life and do the healing for me. But it had gotten really clear that all my old ideas about how to do relationships had gotten me to that one night where I was so alone and hopeless. And no one was coming to save me. And that if my life was ever going to get better, I was going to have to change. Now, if you've ever had to admit this kind of failure to yourself, you know how, like when you really let it in, that like everything you've tried has failed, it actually feels like for a few seconds, it feels like you're going to die. But then, whoop, very quickly, a new feeling fills you up. And it's a sense of surrender and of peace. And then, thank God, possibility and even hope. And everything at this point depends on your willingness to get real and to take action and then keep taking action. Now, negative patterns, I happen to know, are very sticky. They're hard to get rid of. And even when they're gone, they try like hell to come back. And I tell the story of this transformation in my dating course that I mentioned earlier that you can find down in the description section below if you're interested. So when the change in me started to become visible, I think it was very obvious to people. And friends were starting to ask me, like, what happened? How did you do that? And they were calling, and I started making appointments with them to show them my techniques. And soon I was sharing my principles with their friends, and people I didn't even know would call me because they heard I could help them break their trauma patterns. And then eventually I started a blog called Crappy Childhood Fairy, then the YouTube channel, and then the courses and the coaching. And this amazing community grew up around it all. And what we do here is we learn to shed trauma-driven beliefs and become open to a new way and a more practical and rational and self-loving way of living our lives. So we learn to heal brain dysregulation, which is really common with CPTSD, and we learn to operate in a regulated state. And I'm telling you, when you're regulated, everything makes sense about why it was so hard before. When you're regulated, it becomes possible to deprogram yourself. And deprogram is a strong word, I know, but deprogramming is exactly what has to happen when we've gotten stuck in an unconscious and repetitive and destructive cycle of behaviors and beliefs. Now, behaviors are at least partly driven by beliefs. And when we have childhood PTSD, a lot of our beliefs came from trauma experiences. Trauma beliefs are cultural, they're family learned, they're reinforced by friends who likely also have childhood PTSD. And we usually know what we're doing wrong, and we can try to make ourselves act normal, right? Normal. But this kind of symptom fixing is usually only temporary. You can't sustain it. Real change demands that we identify those trauma-driven beliefs and begin to replace them. Now, normal people seem to just know this stuff, but those of us programmed by trauma usually need stronger, clearer guidelines. You can't just give us platitudes, it doesn't work. And we can't just talk about things, that doesn't work. And just breathing, all the things that are positive that some people seem to find help so much, like we need more, we who have CPTSD. So what helps, in addition to getting re-regulated, is to have clear guidelines about how you're going to handle certain situations that are triggering for you, that are slippery, right? You set up guidelines in advance, and that might feel at first countercultural, like unnatural or even radical, right? To have rules for yourself. But that is how to deprogram and then reprogram yourself. And it works. So what is a trauma bond? It's another name for a dynamic that's also called intermittent reinforcement, where one person gives intense affection and approval to the other person and then alternates it with neglect and disapproval and abandonment or even sometimes abuse. Now, you would think that this kind of emotional on-off torture, just blowing hot and cold to the point of cruelty, would drive away prospective partners, right? I mean, this ugly treatment should signal major danger to anyone who actually wanted to be loved. But that's exactly where people traumatized as kids are vulnerable. And if that's you, you probably recognize right away what I'm talking about, whether you had a name for it when it happened to you or not. And you've already noticed that when someone treated you like this, loving you, then turning cold and betraying you over and over, back, forth, it has this insidious power to hook your mind, to grab onto your heart and keep you obsessed and sad and feeling too messed up to get out. I'm Anna Runkle, also known as the Crappy Childhood Fairy, and I teach people how to spot and heal symptoms of complex trauma, including that blind spot that a lot of us develop around toxic romantic relationships, including trauma bonds. Now, trauma bonding can, in theory, happen to anyone. In warfare, it's a form of psychological manipulation that's used on prisoners of war to break them down and get them to abandon their loyalty to their own cause and to their own self-interest, and instead to become completely dedicated to serving their captors. It's a terrible thing to do to a person because it's playing on deep wiring from infancy. It's a survival tactic to do whatever it takes to stay protected and connected to a parent, even if that parent is abusive. And it's interesting, you know, that you can trip that wire in an adult, that it's still there, because in adulthood, clinging to a destructive relationship is just a pure maladaptation. And it reminds me of the way that mistreated animals stay loyal to abusive owners. It's like an involuntary reflex. When I was 6 years old, I went to a little roadside attraction once where they had chickens in wire cages, and you could put like a dime, that's how long ago it was, you could put a dime in the slot, and an electric current would run through the wires and make the chickens dance. They would jump around. And there'd be this little tinny music playing, and it came out of just this little machine attached to their cages. And I'll never forget that. I was totally charmed for the first 5 seconds, and then I asked my brother, like, how do they train chickens to dance? And he explained to me it's an electric shock. And And then I realized, like, I had shocked the chickens. I had made it start by putting my little dime in the slot, and then I couldn't make it stop. And it was very traumatic for me, that poor chicken just jumping around in there. So trauma bonding is like a groove in your psyche that can form in your childhood when a parent, sometimes intentionally, but usually for reasons beyond their control, when they can only give love and attention to you some of the time. And if they're caught up in alcoholism or addiction, it's very common to be super loving one moment and then suddenly they're totally out of it. From your perspective, it's sudden. And they might be rageful, they might be passed out, they might be behaving dangerously. Then they sober up again and they're so sorry and they want to make it up to you. Or they're in some psychological state where that sorry phase never comes. They're just sort of there's food, and then there isn't. And a kid learns to hang on to every tiny sign that the parent loves them, every little crumb of praise or attention, and it very easily does long-lasting damage to a kid's emotions and to your self-concept, right? And when you grow up, it shows up as a crazy high tolerance for the same kind of treatment from partners. It shows up as an attraction to unavailable people, as love addiction, as a willingness to stay, and even an inability to leave abusive people, abusive partners. And none of this, it's not like it's fulfilling. It's not like it makes you happy. None of it is happy. None of it is happy. It's a mental hook. It creates a sense of dread about losing the relationship that feels worse than the pain of being in the relationship. And it's completely unrealistic. The fact is, you could leave, but you don't. And there's a compulsion in trauma bonding to keep trying and trying, that if you could just figure out the right words, the right behaviors, the right responses, you could win the love of this hot and cold person and not have to deal with leaving. And then maybe the love would get switched on for good. But of course, it never works out like that, right? Now, some of you watching this will have been through a trauma bond relationship with someone very dominating who did this to you. And some of you will have done this to another person, in fact. And it's true that there are people who study these tactics and do them on purpose. But I think the vast majority of the time, it's not anything planned out. It's a dynamic that develops between two people who've been conditioned in the past to have an intense emotional response to abandonment, to high drama. So yes, there could be abuse, and if you're in an abusive relationship, I'm going to tell you flat out to get out of it. But in this video, I'm talking not about abuse per se, but about an unhealthy, unhappy dynamic where one partner isn't reliable or committed or equally into the other, and the result for the other partner is to be hooked. And honestly, this can go two ways. Two people can be hooked in, creating drama and the threat that the relationship is ending periodically, maybe just to get that intense result of things coming back together strongly. So obviously that's a drain. It's very hard on people. But with an abandoner especially, that intense feeling of relief and pleasure that when you're allowed to come back into the arms of the person who abandoned you, it feels like the greatest love of all time. But it's not. It's not actually love. It's a bug in the system. It's not a feature, it's a bug. It's one of your conditioned responses that makes you hold on for dear life when you feel threatened with being alone and rejected. It feels like love, but it's more like the dance of that chicken in the cage that I saw when I was a kid. It's an involuntary response to a yucky stimulus. So in other words, if you get hooked in a trauma bond with someone blowing hot and cold, if that's happened to you, it was involuntary. It's not your fault. And I want you to get out of the shame and self-attack that you've maybe been carrying about these relationships, and there can be a lot of shame. You've been hooked on someone, and all your friends can see the person doesn't treat you well. They tell you to leave. You know they're right on some level, but it feels impossible. But here's why I want you to be strong and to open up to learning some strategies to get free, if that's what you want. Because for people with CPTSD, the more time we spend living on the emotional crumbs on the roller coaster in a trauma bond, the harder it is to change. You'll be driven to try to handle it better when you're in that kind of relationship, but you don't want to get good at handling this lousy treatment. You want to be bad at it. You want to give voice to the part of you that still knows that this is not what you're meant for. This isn't what you want. You were born to be loved. You are designed to thrive when you're safe and accepted and supported, just like when you were a kid. That's what you were meant for. And if you're in a relationship where you don't have those things, then effectively you're blocked from your full development. And so it's so important for you to heal and change that dynamic, either by getting out of that relationship or no longer contributing to the high drama dynamic. Because it takes two to be in a trauma bond. And if you're not literally captive to someone, you're the only one who can change the way that you relate to that other person. It's you. You can start with you. They don't even have to be agreeable to change for you to begin your change. And you don't really know how it's going to turn out. You've got to fight your attachment to the idea that somehow the other person will be the one to make it change, or that someone else will come riding into the view to save you. You're going to save you. That's the first thing to understand. The second thing is to address the void in your life that makes the drama and loneliness of a trauma bond seem like something you'd want at all. And if that's happening for you, I'd wager that you're also suffering from a lack of connection with other people in your life. Maybe you're ashamed of your relationship and you're hiding or keeping people at arm's length so they won't judge you, but you need a friend or two. Everyone does. You need people who you can tell what's really going on, who you can be honest with. Just because you're in a hard relationship doesn't mean you have to leave, doesn't mean you have to be ashamed of not having left. Sometimes just being connected with other people reduces the pressure on the relationship. It reduces the need that you have for that relationship to be everything for you. And sometimes that's enough to produce a positive change in the dynamic. This is especially true when two people who love each other and want to be in a relationship are still trauma bonding to some degree by fighting, going through drama, the acting out the whole thing of it's over and coming back together. And even using those upsets to then trigger the happy reunion, if we can call it that, the removal of the threat of breakup and the restoration of harmony. It's a mini kind of trauma bond in itself. A couple could go their whole life doing this, but if you have CPTSD, it's going to create a constant pull, like backward on your healing progress. It's a constant trigger, reactivating your dysregulation and trauma wounds. Peace is a better goal. Connection is a better goal. If you're in a relationship you want to preserve and you both want peace, you can reduce the drama by drawing a hard line against dramatic statements and threats to the future of the relationship. If you ever do need to leave, you'll do it, but there's no need to threaten it or keep talking about it. If you don't threaten the relationship, you're also not going to get the high of that happy reunion, and what's left there is what's going to feel kind of empty. And what goes in that emptiness is a whole bunch of communication, and it takes time. But you can start to strengthen your genuine bond and not have it be so dependent on adrenaline and endorphins to feel real to you. If you're in a relationship where you're actually not loved, though, and you're aware the right thing really is to leave, then getting support from friends to make your transition out as quietly and intentionally and as drama-free as possible will help prevent a re-triggering of the trauma bond. Having friends and practicing your connection makes leaving much more doable. Without friends, it feels unthinkable, right? But with friends, you can envision a life where you're going to be okay. You might say, oh, I don't have friends, but that's often a consequence of being in a high drama relationship. That is something you can start to work on right now. When you've made a friend or two, then you have people to hang out with. You know you won't always be alone. Maybe you even have a place to stay while you sort your life out. Now, trauma bond is in many ways like a drug addiction, and there will be withdrawal. There are strategies that you can use to exit smoothly and with as little drama and retriggering as possible. And I teach that in my dating and relationships course. I also teach how you can change your patterns and do the work to be ready for something lasting and real in the future. And I'll put a link below so you can check out that course if you like. You can learn to date differently and to be with a different kind of person. You can be conscious next time. You can support yourself in having a happy life next time and have clarity and not fall into your old pattern and not get involved with abusive or unavailable people. Healing is possible. I want you to feel that in your bones. Healing is possible for you. You have a life ahead where you can be safe and loved, and you deserve that. You're meant for it. May says, hi, Anna. I'm struggling badly with low motivation to do at least some of the things that will help the CPTSD. Hello. A lot of people have that. I got this diagnosis over 2 years ago after decades of thinking it was depression and anxiety and lots of other issues. Learning about CPTSD has helped me to understand what's going on with me, and that alone has helped me feel a little bit better. However, I have been unable to move to the next stage and do something about it. I'm definitely a freeze type. Freeze, I think she's referring to the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Those are the four things. And Pete Walker is the person who advocates looking at it as four things: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Those are trauma reactions. I experience chronic loneliness, which seems to cause a lot of depression, but I don't think I have clinical depression any longer, as I can feel a lot better when I have face-to-face contact with people. Aha, good clue. Connecting with people is helping your happiness. I have had a deterioration since the start of the pandemic when we had to start working from home. Yes, you and me and a lot of us. It's hard. I'm now spending most of my time alone and feel I am in survival mode. I'm finding it hard to get out of the house, especially this winter, to cook, exercise, etc. I now know what I need to do to help myself, but I just can't do anything except survive each day, trying to cope with work. I don't know how to create good routines and habits while I'm finding life so lonely and hard. I hope you can help with this question. I relate so much to almost all of your videos, but I'm finding it impossible to get started with healing. So May, I'm so glad you wrote this. I think that this is going around big time in the world. And the lack of motivation, I mean, you don't need a pandemic to be suffering with the lack of motivation. It's common. Living in a time in history when survival isn't the immediate threat usually for most people. I know when you say you're just in survival mode, you mean just getting through the day. I remember times when I had minimum wage jobs and I was living in this tiny crappy apartment and sharing a room and just barely getting by, and I had one coat and one pair of shoes. And you know what? I was never depressed back then. I think that the purpose of trying to get enough money to get by and just, be able to make French toast for dinner and have some coffee in the morning, like just achieving that was keeping me happy, actually, keeping me motivated. And so the irony is that when we have choices and when we have leisure time and we have this thing called the internet that's just so full of fun possibilities and entertainments and fake ways of connecting with other people, we can slide way down into a loss of connection and a loss of motivation. So I'm going to give you a hypothesis. You said that when you do connect with people, it does lift your spirits. So you indicate you have a history of clinical depression, but it sounds like what you're suffering from is a lack of connection. And I realize that even as we come towards the end of this pandemic, please let this be the end, very soon this year. But as we come to the end, we've gotten rusty with connecting with people. Those of us who had trouble connecting with people anyway, maybe retreated a little too far away from others, and now we got to come back. And I'm one of those people, I love people when I love them, but when they're hard for me, I just kind of can't deal with them at all. I relate to that. I'm just a really typical person with CPTSD. And people are triggering for me. And so the pandemic gave me the luxury of days on end of not having to deal with anybody except the two people who live in the house with me. And even then, it's like this incredible emotional intensity, especially at the early part of lockdown when that was all there was. I have tons of Zoom meetings every day. Many of us do, but they're no substitute for connecting with people in a real way. And I think this has been a really hard period of time on a lot of fronts. There's been a lot of division. A lot of people aren't speaking to each other. A lot of people are disillusioned and scared. There's all this financial difficulty. People feel like they can't express themselves in the forums that we have because people are getting canceled. And so there's this big negative shift going on. And there's a lot working against our reconnecting with each other. So what I'm going to suggest to you is that you just take all your energy and you work against that disconnection and you reconnect. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of this that the key to happiness is finding what your gifts are and using them. And believe me, most people don't know what they are just right off the bat. They're not just, we're not given a golden tablet about it. We discover them through taking little actions. And so this for you might be going out and getting a cup of coffee. Some days that's a big step, right? Just going out and get a cup of coffee or a cup of tea somewhere and go sit on a bench somewhere and have it and smile at people, all right? For some people, it might be a little more than that. You might call a relative who you haven't talked to in a while or an old friend who you owe a phone call to. you could call them. You're going to think to yourself, well, how about if I reorganize the closet? You know, organized closets are great, but they're not going to keep you company in your old age. So what I'm exhorting you to do here is to go connect for real with people in a way at a higher level than you have. Now, if you're triggered by people, that's going to mean probably titrating a little bit. Titrating means doing a little at a time, a little at a time, a little at a time. And I don't know, maybe you're very good at connecting with people and you're just avoiding it for some reason. But if you get triggered by people, to work with your own triggers and start to toughen them up and get some muscles, get some resilience muscles that help you be able to keep connecting with people even when you're feeling triggered, is to start noticing your triggers, to start getting more neutral to them, and then to recover from them faster. So to do that, what I recommend to people is this titration. So let's say you go get that cup of coffee, you sit on a bench and you smile at people. Now go home, go lay down, go do the whole introvert thing as much as you want and make another plan for a little later in the day. You're going to call somebody. The second day you do a little more, something that involves like a little more putting yourself out there and trying a little harder. Then go home, lay down, do your introvert thing and be so triggered. Now, it just wouldn't be a crappy childhood fairy if I didn't say, you know, you can learn to calm those triggers by using my daily practice. And I'm just going to say it over and over again. You can go learn these techniques. I always put links in the description section below every video. You can go down there and click on the link. It's a free course. You can learn and try the techniques in an hour and just see. It's a simple writing and then meditation technique that helps calm the triggers. You can sort of get them on paper and calm them down. And if you start doing this twice a day, like I recommend, you start to have less and less triggers and you're freer. You're less triggered and you can start to do deeper and more connected activities with people. I hate to say it, like there are times when my PTSD wants to believe that I don't need anybody. I don't need you, I don't need anybody. That's whenever I'm thinking that, I know it's my CPTSD talking. I do need people, and my healing can only happen in connection with other people. It involves a lot of alone time too. There's a lot of reflection that can happen, but the reflection by itself without the connection does not turn into healing. It's sort of like this like stone that starts rolling up the hill and then rolls back down, rolls up the hill and rolls back down. It's the connection with other people that gets that stone over the top of the hill, that takes me over from working on myself to actually experiencing that grace of healing, that good feeling that comes, that like, hey, this is easy for me now. I like it. So I'm after the good feeling, and regretfully, for introverts and people who get triggered by other people, it just requires other people. So anything that you're doing for your healing, I recommend that you just keep weaving in other people into the process in little bits, titrated, and then just see what happens to your motivation. I suspect that your motivation is drained because of the lack of meaningful connection that is preventing your gifts from having anywhere to go. Most people's gifts are designed for the benefit of other people, and if they're not in your life, it's very hard to fulfill that. My gifts probably have something to do with assisting others to heal. If you didn't come and watch my video, I would just be sitting here talking to myself. And can you see how that would not be very fulfilling for me? So I know that people are going to watch this video. I'm taping it all by myself, but I know you're going to be watching it. And so I feel connected to you, and my gift has somewhere to go. And then you talk to me in the comments afterwards, and I'm fulfilled. And I have that experience of my life being for something. And then I feel braver, and then I feel a little more willing to do other things that take courage for me. And that's how it works. It's a bunch of little steps of caring for ourselves, connecting with other people. It's disconnection, dysregulation, and self-defeating behavior. Those are the three things that the trauma manifests as that take us down. Where should you start? Anywhere you can. Just start anywhere you can. So if it's connection with people, just start there. If you can re-regulate yourself, like with the daily practice, start there. If you can tackle a self-defeating behavior like isolating, start there. So there's many ways you can come at it, but that's the general direction it goes in. May, thank you so much for contributing your true story for the service of others. That's a lovely thing you did for us. I hope you will get back to us. Let us know how it went. Let us know what you tried, what worked, what didn't work. And especially, I'm really interested to hear, as things open up again in your world, how do you interact with that? How do you move forward with that? And what happened? The reason you're not getting better, even though you work hard at healing from past trauma, might just be because you keep talking about it, your story. And I know you're not supposed to say that because, going and talking to somebody, it's like the standard thing that you're supposed to do about any kind of emotional struggle. And definitely what's recommended is talking about it if you grew up abused or neglected and it's causing you problems as an adult. Now, every time I say this, I get a few angry letters and then I get a whole bunch of thank you letters because that's what I'm saying. You might consider not talking so much about your trauma. I'm Anna Runkle, also known as the Crappy Childhood Fairy, and I teach people the radical idea that if you're struggling with PTSD from childhood and conventional approaches to treatment, including talk therapy, aren't helping you, you might want to try not talking so much about what happened to you and instead write about it. And in this video, I'm going to give you a little background on that and then tell you some surprising reasons why you might want to consciously talk less about trauma and instead write more. Now, I'm personally someone who gets completely dysregulated when I talk openly about trauma from my past. My heart pounds, my face gets numb, I get clumsy and discombobulated. And it's not that I've never talked about it. I've struggled through the telling of this story many, many times. And maybe you've kept your story secret, but if you're like most people, you've told it. You've told it again and again and again. Telling someone what happened is an important process, and it's usually essential to healing, really, but talking and talking and talking about the past in therapists' offices, back when I used to do that, was not only not helping me, it was putting me in a worse state when I left that appointment than when I had walked in. And a lot of you had told me the same thing happened to you. Whatever you might have gained from therapy couldn't even happen because you'd go into such a stressed state inside that you couldn't really process what was being discussed or make any plans to do something or have an insight about how to make life better, right? It just becomes that talking like a vortex sucking you down. Now, in my case, I'd gotten past the point where I couldn't keep going with that anymore, which is frightening because at the time anyway, I didn't know any alternatives to talking to a therapist. That's just what you're supposed to do, right? And then one day, I was able to stop because I found a completely different approach to healing that was not based on talking, but based on writing. Now, this was a technique I could use myself, and I could do it anywhere I wanted or wherever I happened to be. And I learned it just in a very short amount of time from this woman I was acquainted with. And then from time to time, she would allow me to call her and read what I had written, and she would give me some help with that. But other than that, this was totally self-directed, self-contained, and best of all, free. Now, if you're someone who can't talk about this stuff without getting triggered, you're probably like me and you still crave, you need someone to hear you, to understand. And you can have that by reading what you wrote. You write it and you read it, and for reasons of the way our brain is wired, you can bypass that trigger that sets off the dysregulation when you talk about past trauma. Now, I'm not saying that's 100% true for everybody, but it's documented. It's true for me. It's true for a lot of the people in my community. And the only way you're going to find out if it's easier for you to write it and read it is to try it. So yeah, if you're interested, you can learn it for free from a course that I created. I always put a link to it below my videos in the description section. So you can pop down there and find that if you want when you're done watching the video, or right now if you want. But when I started to regularly write about the memories and thoughts that were putting me in distress, and I do this twice a day, writing fears and resentments using this special technique. When I started doing that regularly, it was a very short time before I popped out of that stuck place, which, was essentially a very bad depression, but it was like locked in with CPTSD, right? It had held me back for years, and now I know why. And what I experienced after I was writing regularly, I felt happier, less angry, more focused, more excited about my life, less consumed with how I was feeling all the time. Just like overall way better than I had been in therapy. And at this time, I was in therapy 3 times a week. So this is after trying many, many therapists. She was really good, but it's just that talking about trauma was continually putting me back into the cycle of PTSD. Now, The research didn't make a big splash at the time, but back in the 80s, a researcher from the University of Texas in Austin named James Pennebaker found out that people who wrote about past trauma, even a little bit, I think they did it 4 times for 15 minutes a sitting over 4 days, and it showed a big measurable change in their use of healthcare in the following months. And since this was like a student population, they could tell who came in for healthcare. And the people who had been writing used healthcare 50% less. They were seeking care 50% less often than the general population at school. And what this suggested, and the study was replicated in a whole lot of other places, was that there was a positive health benefit to writing about trauma. Well, now we know that writing uses that different part of the brain than talking, and where talking about a terrible thing that happened can re-trigger a trauma response, you know, getting your whole endocrine system going and adrenals and hearts pounding. Writing can allow you to express what happened without re-triggering all that. And as you may know from experience, when you have active PTSD, that constant triggering and re-triggering is exhausting. It's hard on your emotions, it's hard on your body, it wears you down, and it can keep you trapped in your trauma. Now again, it's important to talk about it sometimes. And if that's what's helping you, by all means, you should keep talking about trauma with a therapist. But if you're finding that you keep getting stuck when you're telling your story, that it's bringing you down, you're not progressing, you might want to try writing. Now, in my opinion, some forms of writing are more helpful than others. Some people write long lists of bad things that were done to them and things that they hate about people, for example. And actually, you know, if we go by Pennebaker's research, that probably is helpful. But for me, just listing the bad thoughts tends to kind of bring me down. I think it's something like the written equivalent of ranting. So it may bypass the trigger, but it still remains very negative. The technique I teach has a lighter touch than that. You get to write it down, but it's all oriented toward releasing it. Now, you might be afraid that releasing your fears and resentments would just leave you defenseless, like, la la, you know, whatever happens, happens, but it's on the contrary. Fear of immediate danger is healthy and not the same thing as the fears that I'm suggesting you try writing. I'm talking about the hamster wheel fears and resentments, the ruminating and whirling and repetition fears and resentments that go around in your head and keep you awake at night, keep you agitated and pulling away from life. This kind of fear and resentment doesn't keep you safe in any way. It doesn't make you logical. More often, it clouds your judgment. And in fact, when you need to protect yourself or set a boundary or act courageously, you get bogged down in confusion and doubt. So that can be cleared up. And then you can feel more clear and more aware of what's going on around you, less distracted by anxious thoughts and more able to pounce or fight or say hello or even decide not to say anything. You have choices in front of you. And that can be the most powerful thing of all, is just to decide how you want to respond to any situation that you're in. Now, in terms of your relationships with other people, having this healthy, self-contained way to process your negative feelings can make a huge difference in what happens when you have conflict. For one thing, you're no longer leaking fear and resentment all over the other person, either with prickly anger or anxiousness that comes off like neediness. And with less fear and resentment, you're less likely to explode when feelings get intense. You can learn to interact with other people without leading with the story of what happened to you, because this is common with a lot of traumatized people. We get so identified with the trauma that it's like the second or third thing that we tell people about ourselves. And this is alienating to other people, well, definitely to healthy people. Leading with your trauma, like putting that out there as a frontline thing about your identity, it's one reason that you might have found your life populated with a lot of other traumatized people, and worse, people who are truly unavailable and screwed up and could be very hurtful to you. So when you have a healthy way to process the past, you get to be here now. You get to pay attention. You get to enjoy your life. And instead of being a victim or a survivor, you just get to be you. You get to be defined by who you are and not what other people did to you. Now, I know with me, I sometimes got hesitant to stop identifying with past trauma because, I don't know, feeling damaged was like my safe place, where I had protection against anyone expecting very much of me. Like, don't look at me, I had a rough childhood, I can't be expected to bring a very big thing to the potluck. You know, that kind of thing. And I found friends who were on board with that because they were doing it too. And as I grew and healed, that began to feel uncomfortable for them. And It often made them feel judged, even though that's not what I was doing. Okay, sometimes I was judging them, right? But there comes a time when it doesn't feel good to try to make everyone see you as a damaged person who they have to make an exception for. And I grew to feel that I wanted to be seen as a good-hearted and capable person who could be trusted. And soon that is how I was seen. It feels better to be true to yourself more than true to your story. And to be able to turn your attention outward to the world, to the people and the adventures that lie ahead of you. What I'm seeing as I hear from all the people in the channel, in my online community who engage with my content about patterns that are helpful and patterns that really just make people who want to heal feel miserable. Okay, so I notice two basic self-concepts out there. The first is what I notice in people who are working hard to figure out the problem caused by their experiences and to find the solutions that seem to help them get better. Now, not everything they've tried may have been helpful, but they're active in this project and noticing where they get lifted up and where they fall short. And when they comment, they'll tell you these little nuggets of wisdom. They'll say, you know, I tried X, I did Y, I did Z, and X was horrible. Y was okay, but Z was amazing, and that's what really helped me. And there are clear signs that someone is healing too, that they get along better with people, they feel more at ease in groups or when they're alone, and their talents and gifts start emerging and filling up their lives with purpose and hopefulness and a helpfulness for other people as well. And they'll begin to tell you that. So for this first group, they're subscribing to my channel because, and this is what they tell me, it's practical, it's solution-oriented, and it's based on not just theory, but real experience that they can relate to. They feel seen, they feel not alone anymore. I love that. I feel that way too. And for people who are having a breakthrough in their healing like this, it is so exciting to try out new tools, new ideas, and see if there's something in there that they can use. They want inspiration. They want to hear how other people heal. They want action steps. They're ready to go. Now, you can tell I'm very fond of this group, right? I also love the second group, but these are the folks where the breakthrough hasn't happened yet. They're good people. They've worked really hard on their healing, and a lot of them are knowledgeable about the treatments out there, and they've tried a lot of them, but the healing hasn't come yet. And so this group is really, really discouraged, and they come to feel helpless and hopeless, and you can see it in the comments they write. Now, deep down inside, they've stopped believing that healing is possible for them. And all that leaves them, and you see it in their comments, is bitterness. So people who are going through this will have a lot to say about things outside of themselves, family members, exes, society, the people who said they would help them but couldn't or wouldn't, anybody who made them feel unimportant and unseen and unloved. And that's all real, and I know it hurt them. People in this state of discouragement can tell you very clearly what's wrong with all this, what ought to change, and what their pain is like. They're very, very in touch with their pain. And most of us have been there. That's part of it, right? For all of us. But this second group, this discouraged and stuck group, what's also clear is that they have a very vague or non-existent concept of themselves, of what they would be like without that emotional pain. The pain becomes everything, as if it's who they are. And so they can't see themselves in a different future state where things have changed for the better. They can't even imagine it, what they might be like, what day-to-day life would feel like if they weren't trapped inside their own symptoms. So that's what I mean by stuck. Now, getting stuck in pain and isolation is a very traumatized thing to do. It happens to everybody sometimes. But if you want to break out of that, you have to do what I call breaking the wheel. And what I mean by the wheel is the churning, negative thinking and emotion states that go round and round with us. The blame, the obsession with people who hurt you, the struggles, the failures, the ways that you were never accepted or seen, and the stories that you told yourself over and over about why you are the way you are. And it's not that these stories are not true necessarily, but if we can't stop the spinning, the wheel just gets stronger and faster. And it's like a centrifuge, right? Something spinning that throws off and scatters everything that comes near it. It throws off people who love us. It throws off wonderful opportunities. It throws off financial security and joy, right? All gone. And the wheel is very seductive at the same time, and that's why I use this metaphor. You can't just slow the wheel down. You don't ask it a lot of questions or analyze the trajectory of everything that's flying around the room. You just have to take a big metaphorical stick and shove it in there and break that wheel. And don't worry, the wheel's made of air, and when you break it, the whole thing evaporates. It's not going to hit you in the face with fragments or anything. It just evaporates. It's gone. It's like waking up from a bad dream. You thought the wheel got the better of you, but it didn't. And you thought it protected you, but it actually just kept you stuck in pain and made you see nothing but helplessness. But you know what? You're not helpless. There's a whole wide world of experiences out there if you can get a little breathing room just to get started from that cycle of fear and anger and analysis and diagnosis and blame and then fear again. Thinking and talking about this stuff doesn't make it go away. It goes away, and remember, all you need is just a little bit of breathing room. It goes away when just for a moment you can just release the story. Open yourself up to a fresh and new experience of yourself and your capabilities in present time. The focus needs to come off of time past and other people and onto the only thing you can heal, which is yourself. And the knowledge that right here, right now, through practical steps, you open the door to that healing process by changing your mental state. Not helpless, hopeful. And for there to be hope, you need to have a vision, an ideal. You need to have a belief that healing is possible inside your own healing, whether or not other people change, whether or not circumstances change. This is the crucial sign that someone is on a good path. They recognize their own agency. Do you know that term? They begin to see choices that they can make, even when CPTSD puts nothing but hard choices in front of them. You always have a choice, and despite the symptoms you have today, you can move one foot in front of the other toward the healed life that you deserve. Now, you can choose to learn a new way to respond to the inevitable stressors and hardships of life. They will never stop. Life's going to keep throwing this stuff at you, but you can change. It starts in here. It starts in the way that you regard the possibility of your own healing. Can you see it? Do you believe it's possible that things could be better and easier in the future than they are right now? And are you willing to make some changes, starting with the way you talk to yourself about your trauma? Because if you're telling yourself that you're hopelessly screwed up, then whether you mean to or not, you're disconnecting with your life and all the people in it. People generally have a lot of compassion, but when they sense that negative wheel is spinning, it's like a hum. You can feel it in other people, right? And it makes you want to pull away. So it ends up isolating you when you go there. The very thing you're longing for isn't happening for you when that wheel is spinning. And you're like, why can I not get some support? Why doesn't anyone believe in me? Can't they see that I need some help? And that is a really hard place to be. And worst of all, that spinning wheel of negative ideas about yourself blinds you to who you really are, to all the good things that you're capable of bringing to this world. Your life is real. Your life is important. So how do you even begin? And this is one of the reasons childhood PTSD is so hard, is because it can make even little steps just seem overwhelming. And God forbid, there's a whole list of things that you need to do and you know it. It can be paralyzing. But if today you can just do one thing, I'll keep it really simple for you. Just get it into your mind what it will feel like when your PTSD reactions to life are reduced. You want to give it a try? Let's take a minute and I'll walk you through it. Imagine you're in a stressful situation. You're making a mistake at work, or visiting your family, or getting your feelings hurt by a friend who lets you down. Pick something that's both hard for you, but also that's likely to happen at some point in your future. It's realistic. Now, remember what it's like when your CPTSD triggers start firing up and that wheel starts to spin. Here it goes. And you start getting dysregulated and you start reacting in the old ways you hate. You feel tight, your heart races, you want to lash out. Maybe you start getting numb and you get scared that that same old part of you that always comes out when you're triggered is going to happen one more time. Okay? Now, let that go. Now, imagine you're in that situation. The bad thing happens, But now your PTSD symptoms are 50% less. You feel a little rise when you're triggered, but it doesn't go over the top. You don't lose control. You still have choices about the words you say, your facial expression, the harsh thoughts that are going through your head. You can see them, but you can decide not to say anything in the moment. Would a 50% reduction in symptoms change how that all turned out? Okay, probably, right? Same situation, but this time let's take the symptoms down a little more to say 20% of what you're used to. What would that be like? The bad thing happens, you feel it, it hurts, but it doesn't carry you away. Would you be able to express yourself better? Would you be able to stay present and keep your choices? Could the relationship that in the past would have blown up in your face instead survive without damage, even though something hurt your feelings? Would it make a difference in your life if you could do that long term whenever stressful situations come up, right? Would strength in this area allow you to change some of your circumstances? Would it be easier then to make friends with people who fit you a little better than the ones you have right now in your life? And if that were all going well, could you imagine other things going well? Your relationship with a partner, your career, your physical health, your ability to share your gifts with the world. Well, now you just joined the ranks of the first group I mentioned. That's how you do it. The ones who can see, imagine a better future, and the ones who are more likely than anybody else to actually make it there. Starts by allowing yourself to believe that you're capable of changing your life. Dear Anna, if you do decide to respond to this letter, feel free to skip the background information. And so I was going to skip the background information and go right into the today problem, but it was a situation where I think the background is really relevant, that explains a lot about how she got to this situation. So I'm going to start with reading her present time, and then I'll read you the background. All right. Almost 3 years ago, I moved into a shared house, which I live in now, and I met a man 9 years older than me. I'll call Miles. When we met, he was in a great place emotionally, but he'd suffered a lot of trauma in his past. A seriously abusive brother and a father who committed suicide, leaving Miles to find him. Our relationship has taught me so much, and I feel like I've truly been in love for the first time. He's so much like my dad was, it's kind of scary, but there are some serious problems. After the first 6 months, he came off his meds and he got really sick again. His severe anxiety and depression came back. When he's sick, he barely leaves the house and uses weed to cope. He has no friends. I'm the only person in his life apart from his mom, who lives in another country, and his 3 housemates. There were a lot of problems in our relationship, and we ended up breaking up after 9 months. We got back together a month later, and then COVID happened. Over lockdown, we grew so close, and when things are good between us, he is someone I could see myself being with the rest of my life. He's kind, sensitive, compassionate, patient, knowledgeable. We laugh for hours. We can talk for 8 hours, and it feels like 30 minutes. But when things are bad, they're bad. He has a seriously bad temper. When he becomes angry, he's irrational, manipulative, and cruel. He laughs at me, and honestly, he becomes a bully. I'm pretty sure he has CPTSD too, but he hasn't been diagnosed. It takes hardly anything to set him off, and once he goes, he goes. He screams, punches walls. It's awful. When he gets angry, I feel powerless. I don't feel scared, but I feel bullied. I feel like my words mean nothing because anything I say, he twists and mocks and shouts over me, but if I cut him off, he screams to get out. He knows I have serious issues around abandonment, but he does it anyway. I feel like I've been so patient. I've tried everything to help him. He needs serious help. He has extremely complex mental health needs, and he's pretty certain he has autism too. I don't want to imagine my life without him, but if I saw a woman being treated by their partner the way he treats me when he's angry, I'd be horrified. I'd probably call the police. And the awful thing is, Miles would too. When he's not filled with rage, he understands all of these things, but he has no control of himself. For context, apart from the emotional and verbal abuse, he shows no other abusive tendencies like control, trying to isolate, physical harm, or threats, etc. My question is, what do I do? Do I leave because of how horrifically damaging his rage is, or should I continue trying to help him with his triggers and mental health? Okay. So I was going to answer that, and some of you can sort of anticipate probably where I'm going to go with that, but I wanted to read Melanie's background. I think this explains so much, and I think it will help inform how I talk to Melanie about what she can do about this. Okay. From as far back as I remember, she wrote, my dad was the center of my world. I adored him, and we were incredibly close. However, he had a business in another country, so he would fly back and forth, spending weekends with us and weekdays in the other country. My mom started physically and emotionally abusing me when I was about 6. This carried on until I was 13. She never did it when my dad was around, but I would often call him, sobbing, begging him on the phone to come and save me. He always told me she shouldn't be doing this, but looking back, I don't understand why he didn't do anything. He was an incredible father, but that piece just doesn't make sense. My mom began drinking heavily when I was around 10, and as you can imagine, the abuse got worse. We were having serious money problems at the time, with bailiffs coming to the door and my mom drinking and taking Valium to try and cope. She had multiple affairs, which I witnessed as she would bring some of the men home. One of them was a friend of mine. One was a teacher of mine. My dad knew none of this. I was tempted to tell him several times, but at the last moment, I'd back out. At the time, I had pretty bad social anxiety, but for the most part, I was just a normal kid growing up and adjusting. Then when I was 15, my dad had a seizure. It was just me and him in the house, and I found him lying on the sofa. I have pretty traumatic memories of that because he was shouting for me a few times and I'd ignored him, thinking it wasn't anything important. It ended up being a brain tumor. He had many seizures over the next few months and even had one while he was driving and ended up in the hospital. The whole thing was incredibly traumatic. His personality changed. He went from being a sweet, gentle man to an aggressive and strange one. I was numb for that whole year until he died, and by the time I properly realized what had happened, it was too late. After he died, the abuse from my mom went from 5 to 500. It was relentless emotional and verbal abuse for 3 years until I moved out to escape. Either she was cruel or she was suicidal. I never knew which version I'd get when I got home. She'd go from telling me she wished I was never born, that she hated me, that I was a loser with no friends, to telling me she wanted to die. My sister was away at university, so it was just me and my mom. I was pretty good at blocking out what she said, but I remember the day I broke. It was like all of the defenses shattered with a few of her usual hateful words, and everything she ever said got inside. The next few years of my life were chaotic and painful. I was self-harming constantly and ended up in a string of toxic long-term relationships back to back. The first was at 16 after my dad died. Each one lasted about a year. I'm almost 25 now. And with Miles. All right, Melanie. What a hard childhood you had. I'm so sorry. That's so unjust that this happened to you. And I can totally understand that you'd be with a guy like Miles and that it would be confusing to you. I circled so many things. Like, I don't like to be just, obvious and trite with this, but there are so many parallels between how he's treating you and what you went through as a teenager with your parents. And starting with, so I want to talk about trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is when somebody switches it on and it's great, and then they turn terrible on you. And that's what you say about your mom. You never knew who you were going to see. Your dad, you're saying he was so great, he loved you, and he was an incredible father, except that you told him that your mom was abusing you and he didn't do anything. So right there, that's a crap fit move where you adjusted yourself to just believe in your dad and see him as this great guy, even though really, honestly, any good parent would be gravely concerned about the other parent abusing the kids, and that they call and beg for help. That would be gravely concerning. And if, I don't know what it was with him, but he didn't respond. He totally let you down. And I'm so sorry, but he totally let you down. And then your mom was drinking. There were money problems, the affairs with people you knew and everything. What absolute chaos, what a total lack of boundaries. And your dad didn't know. And yet, how could he not know? You were tempted to tell him, you were trying to, I totally get that. I remember trying to take care of my dad's feelings too when I was a kid, when I knew that stuff that was going on with my mom was going to upset him. And I didn't want him to be upset. I felt like even when I was a little kid, I had to protect his feelings. So I'm really sorry that you had to do that. I totally get it. And you had social anxiety. Well, yeah, but that you had some normalcy as a kid. And then when you were 15, your dad had a seizure and it was brain cancer. So something that was interesting is that you have all this guilt and trauma about that because he was shouting for help a few times and you ignored him thinking it wasn't anything important. So he was like, help, help. And probably some idea that you could have saved him, which if it was a brain tumor, you couldn't have. It just was going to progress as it was going to progress. So it's not your fault. But I can imagine how traumatic that experience would be of finding out how serious it was and having not come to his aid right away. And it just reminds me of the last thing you wrote about your boyfriend here. Do I leave because of how horrifically damaging his rage is, or should I continue trying to help him with his triggers and mental health? So this desire to help, we'll come back to that. Then this thing where you didn't know who your mom was going to be and the abuse escalated and you got out. Good job, you got out. And and your sister went to university, so you both got out, and that's great. And then one day it's like something broke, and it seems like that happens sometimes, that we can sort of contain a lot of childhood trauma, and then one day, boom, it just, like maybe a new trauma happens or something triggers it and it comes out and we can't really get the genie back in the bottle. That happened for me when I was assaulted on the street. Like I was managing kind of okay, and then I couldn't at all. It was all just coming up. So I just understand you. I understand you and I relate, and I think you've done an amazing job of holding it together despite a truly horrific childhood that you didn't deserve. It's not your fault. So I wanted to come back to what you said here about your current relationship. 3 years ago, you moved in and to share a house where you live with a man who is 9 years older. And when you met, he was in a great place emotionally, but he'd suffered a lot of trauma in the past. Abusive brother, father committed suicide. That's very serious. Interesting little resonance there with your mom's suicide threats. Our relationship has taught me so much, you say, and that's often what people say in abusive relationships, that they learned so much. And I feel like I've truly been in love for the first time. So I get it, though. The relationship's over and you're taking stock of what was valuable to you. You learned a lot. You were in love. He's so much like my dad was, it's kind of scary. So when you say that, you're probably talking about good qualities, but I would just say your dad is somebody who totally abandoned you again and again and again, and especially when you needed him. So, and then you say, but there are some serious problems. And you say after the first 6 months, he came off his meds and got really sick again. Sounds similar to your mom, who was mentally unstable too. His severe anxiety and depression came back. When he's sick, he barely leaves the house and uses weed to cope. He has no friends. I'm the only person in his life apart from his mom, who lives in another country, and his 3 housemates. So I don't know. I think for someone who's been so severely abandoned and abused, and as you have been, that sometimes being needed that much, like being somebody's only person, can kind of help you feel whole or focused or something. I could see the appeal in that. But of course, for a healthy relationship, it would be a terrible idea to get together with somebody who you're their only person besides their housemates, and somebody and a parent who lives in another country. Then you say there were a lot of problems in our relationship. Okay, that's, sure, of course. And we ended up breaking up after 9 months. We got back together a month later, then COVID happened, and over lockdown, we grew so close. And when things are good between us, he's someone I could see myself being with for the rest of my life. So I think one of the things about lockdown, especially when it was so intense, is that for some people, it took a lot of pressure off. Like for some people, it intensified pressure because of being stuck together at home. For some people, it took the pressure off, people who get dysregulated by having to be out in the world and deal with people. So it sounds like it might have been kind of a helpful phenomenon for you. But of course, you can't just stay in lockdown for the rest of your life. And So then you said, he's kind, sensitive, compassionate, patient, knowledgeable. We laugh for hours. We can talk for 8 hours and it feels like 30 minutes. All right. But when things are bad, they're bad. So this is where we're talking about trauma bonding. Trauma bonding. So it's so great. He talks and laughs. You're so connected and close. And then all of a sudden it goes bad. It also sounds a bit like your mom, right? To become totally abusive. He has a serious bad temper. When he becomes angry, he's irrational, manipulative, and cruel. Again, sounds like your mom. He laughs at you. And honestly, he became a bully. I'm pretty sure he has CPTSD too, probably, but if you love somebody with CPTSD, that's a totally important criteria, is that they recognize it and do something about it and don't just keep acting out on it and expecting you to fit yourself to it, right? So it takes hardly anything to set him off. And once he goes, he goes. He screams, punches walls. It's awful. When he gets angry, I feel powerless. I don't feel scared, but I feel bullied. Well, I think it's interesting that you don't feel scared. That doesn't sound rational to me. Somebody punching walls is pretty terrifying. And, you know, it's physical violence. It hasn't been targeted at you yet, but you're only with him 9 months. And I would just say chances seem very high to me it would escalate to that pretty easily. And with that level of rage, no way. No way. That is not a place to be. I feel like my words mean nothing, you said, because anything I say he twists and mocks and shouts over me, but if I cut him off, he screams at me to get out. Okay, hardcore emotional abuse. It doesn't have to be physical abuse to be abuse. Emotional abuse will also ruin your life. And emotional abuse causes CPTSD, and emotional abuse drives people to the point that they don't want to live anymore. Emotional abuse is unacceptable. All right. He knows I have serious issues around abandonment, which we understand, but he does it anyway. So there's that part of you that's thinking, but he knows he's a rational person. And if he knows I have a sensitivity, of course he would take care of me. But see, he's too far gone. He's too far gone that if he knows or cares, you know, this part of him just takes over and becomes abusive. An abusive guy doesn't care and doesn't take care of you and could kill you. He has extremely complex mental health needs, and he's pretty certain he has autism also. Well, it sounds terrible, okay? It just sounds completely unworkable. So you say, I don't want to imagine my life without him. And I understand that. It's for a person with abandonment. The reason that's so hard to imagine is because it triggers that abandonment melange of intense grief and rage and panic. And it's so much more intense than what normal people experience. And I know about it. I have it too. It's not your fault you have it. You didn't make your brain like that. It's a neurological reaction that gets triggered. But I'll tell you what, when you have a name for it, abandonment melange, it's a thing. It's a thing that's really common. You can read a really good work about it in Pete Walker's book, CPTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. I'll throw a link to that below. I think he coined the phrase abandonment melange. And the first time I heard that, I was like, I know exactly what that is. And once you know what it is, then you can notice when it's happening. You can go, oh, this is abandonment melange. That's why I'm having this totally like over the top horrible feeling about this. Because when it's on us, we just feel like we have to go to any lengths to make the abandonment stop, including put up with abuse. That's what happens. So you say, I don't want to imagine my life without him, but that's why you can. Once you know it's abandonment melange, you can accept it and you can let it wash over you like a wave. You will be absolutely okay. You're a 25-year-old person. You will be okay. You can do this. And you're going to need support, right? But you say, if you saw a woman being treated by their partner the way he treats you when he's angry, you'd be horrified. You'd probably call the police. So that right there is you being able to stand outside yourself and just see this is horrible. Police should be called. This is criminal what's going on. It's not safe at all. You say the awful thing is he would do that too. He would think that too. When he's not filled with rage, he understands all of these things. Well, people who fill up with rage and can't be counted on to understand these things are the people who end up murdering their partners. But he has no control of himself. For context, apart from the emotional and verbal abuse, he shows no other abusive tendencies, control, trying to isolate, physical harm and threats, etc. Okay, so I'm going to be really tough love. Those are famous last words of people who are abused by intimate partner violence. it's this bad, but it's not this bad. But it tends to escalate. That's what happens. So when you say, my question is, what do? I would really encourage you to call and get the help of a women's shelter. I don't think you need a shelter like you've already broken up. It's not that you need somewhere to go, but I really encourage you to avail yourself of the kind of help that is special for a person who has been abused, because it's an unusual kind of psychology. It can be very irrational. It can be very sticky. It's very hard to get out. Your mind will say, no, 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 I have to go back. And he might invite you back. It's very hard to leave, but that kind of help can be life-saving. And beyond that, it can help you build your life back and just kind of get your perception back. When I say back, I realize that it was taken from you at such a young age, but it's in there. You have demonstrated through all of these things, including writing this letter that's very lucid, that your spirit is intact, that a lot of these mechanisms, the trauma bonding, the crap fitting, the going into denial about how bad everything is and thinking there's a way that you can help him heal. Because I would just say, well, how's that working for you? You've been working really hard trying to help him heal. How's that working for you? He's not healed. And I would just say, take it from Miss Anna, when people are sick in this way, you can't help them. You can't help them. People have to want some help themselves, or they need to be locked up. And it's a case for professional help at this point. And it sounds like there's a lot of isolation there, and it doesn't look like it's going to get better anytime soon. You, on the other hand, you have a future ahead of you, and there are so many things you can change so that you never have this kind of relationship again. So yes, help from counselors or a women's shelter where they have experience with people who have been emotionally abused and have been around physical violence, even if it wasn't directed at them. You didn't say whether you're in therapy, but after everything you've been through, I just really encourage you to find effective, strong, positive, forward-thinking support for the changes you're trying to make in your life. It's really important to have people who can give you a reality check on your perception. When, as a child, your perceptions were always denied. No, that's not going on. Everything's fine. My dad's a great dad. All that denial, it can really throw you off from pursuing things in a good and positive way. And you end up letting back in people in your life. I have a dating course you might want to check out that walks you through steps to identify how did you end up getting together with people who are unworkable, and how can you identify the traits in somebody that would mean that they're suitable for you. So that walks you through that. You could check that out. That link will be down below. You might want to go to a 12-step program. A 12-step program means you can go to meetings every day and you can make friends with other people who are also trying to heal. And many of them have had problems similar to yours. When you have friends to hang out with and a meeting to go to every night, you never have to hang on to a relationship. Because, I mean, honestly, how many relationships did you hold on to just because you were afraid to be alone? Maybe all of them or a lot of them, right? If you're like me, a lot of them. You don't want to be alone. But if you have friends who are always there and you always know where to go and everybody goes out to dinner afterwards, you don't need to hold on to a bad relationship. It's a lot easier to just let them roll right past you. And then take your time and start to do the recovery work of healing. Start to do that work that helps you become more fully yourself while you're outside of a relationship, more clear about what would be a good match for you, and more structured so that you can proceed slowly and not move in together after 3 months like before. That's, for people with CPTSD, that's a really common thing that we do. We kind of rush in and get all enmeshed with people. Then we get to know them and we're like, what have I done? How do I get out? So if you can avoid moving in together, actually if you can avoid sleeping together for quite a while, that will help give you that emotional mobility to date them, get to know them, find out if their red flags are waving, and proceed slowly and with the support of friends. And that, I'm walking you through the future of dating because I just know that that's probably a big concern. Like, can that ever happen again? It totally can. But just remember, the unhealed person who rushes out and dates again when they haven't really healed from what happened before tends to create the same kind of relationship, even though they don't want to. I can't tell you how many times I got broadsided by my own choices. Didn't see it coming.
I'm also fascinated by, like, can you tell me more about like what what other self-regulation things, you know what I mean, like really worked for you
Well,
as the year progressed, you know?
yeah. I think in my 20s, I was able to. I feel like my CPTSD, it's sort of like I don't have alcoholism, but I'm very affected by alcoholism, obviously.
Mhm.
And I learned in 12-step recovery myself about how alcoholism is progressive and fatal. Like a person could stop drinking and everything
Sure.
would be great. And then, 15 years later, they drink again and their alcoholism is much progressed. And
Yep,
that's,
sure.
I feel like CPTSD is like that, that it requires, for me, a daily maintenance. And that when I start having good days, I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, I don't really need to use my tools or do anything because I'm healed now. I'm good. I've got this nice husband, everything's great. But actually what happens when I don't stay in my sort of daily routine and the stuff that I do to support myself,
Yeah.
which includes techniques, but also connecting with people, like lockdown has really taught me how sensitive mine and a lot of people's CPTSD symptoms are to isolation. And it's a self,
Mhm.
it's a bad spiral because you start isolating and then you can't deal with people, you can't tolerate, right? It's just so triggering. And so whatever the triggers are, so for me, part of my routine for regulation involves things that are sometimes out of my comfort zone, like participating, speaking up, not speaking up, like learning to just have a little bit of like choice about
Mm,
that. And so I'm not like lashing out,
mm,
but nor am I sitting there suffering in silence and getting elegant.
mm.
I had a gathering at my house the other night, and some guests got a little bit heated in a discussion about something.
Oh,
And
wow.
I saw other guests sort of shifting in their chair. And
Yeah,
in my
right.
heart, I was thinking, I'm starting to get triggered. I don't know if
Yeah.
everybody else is getting triggered, but I still had my capacity, because I had used my
Yep.
techniques before the party, faithfully.
Mhm.
But I just was like, before I get triggered and before everybody else gets triggered, I need to find an elegant way to sort of like calm this situation without being super codependent, without being controlling, without shaming the people who are getting a little bit heated, because
Right.
it's a party that I have periodically for people to discuss things. And it's wonderful, but of
Mhm.
course it's going to get heated sometimes and people feel strongly, and they're
Mhm.
good people and they wouldn't be there if I didn't have faith in them. So we had a presenter and I went over to her and I put my hand on her shoulder because she was presenting and some people sort of digressed and were getting heated, and I put my hand on her shoulder. And it's what would help me, a hand on the shoulder, just like ground me please, come,
Mm,
call me back. And she's a young person who had prepared a lot for the presentation she gave for people to discuss. And
mm.
I put my hand on her and I just said, I really want to hear what our presenter was going to say. Would everybody be okay with that? Could we hear that? And when I went to bed that night, I was telling my husband, I was like, I am so proud of myself. Like, I didn't freak out. I was a good
Yeah.
hostess. I took care of the presenter. I took care of the people who were getting heated, and everything kind of like naturally shifted. And later, as the party was winding down, people were chatting with each other and saying, that was kind of intense. I was worried, but then it got better. And I was just like, nobody knows my private victory that I was able to be part of the sort of thing. People getting heated
Mm.
and yelling is like used to be just kryptonite for me. It just would ruin
Wow.
everything. And I would be likely to either totally shut down and never want to see those people again, or lash out and say things that were way more intense than I meant for them to come out and damage my relationships with him. So the
Wow.
minute I get triggered, I go into terror. I'm going to ruin my relationships. I'm going to ruin my social circle. No one's ever going to
Right.
like put up with me again. So there's this thing. I was so proud of myself. So people on my channel know I use a technique. I've used it 27 years. It was taught to me by this young woman who was pretty fresh off the streets, who had learned it in AA. She taught me how to write my fears and resentments on paper and then ask for them to be removed. And at that time, like asking at some kind of a higher power was just like, and she's just like, well, you told me that you feel like dying. So, if you want to try what I do, I would recommend you
Mhm.
just pretend there's something that will help you with this. Because what else are you going to do?
Right.
And at that
Yeah.
time, I was in therapy 3 times
Not a
a
lot of
week. So I
options.
had that piece. So she taught me to do that. And it was like so powerful for me.
Right.
My mind, it took about 2 weeks for my mind to kind of like snap into place like Legos. I just like all of a
Mm.
sudden I could focus, I could hear the headphones with ACDC came off, so to speak, and I could
Oh,
be
yeah.
present. But then I had a
Yes.
lifetime of habits and self-defeating behaviors to start to understand and work with. So it didn't, like, getting regulated was the beginning, but I grew up poor. I grew up in a house with
Right.
violence. I grew up with a lot of shame. I sought
Me too.
regulation through stuff like, stupid sexual relationships when I was too young and had no idea what was going on and got very hurt by them. Like a lot of things or smoking pot, or all the things that I used to seek out for regulation either were ultimately self-destructive, or they just weren't sufficient. And the writing,
Yeah.
for me, I follow it with a really simple meditation. That those two things were enough to put me up on the playing field, to start having choices about, like, what conversation am I going to have right now? How will I choose to deal with it if somebody insults me? Just start
Right.
having a choice about it. It's been
We're so.
it's a never-ending process. So I don't want to talk
Mhm.
about it like, and then everything was Cinderella. It's of course not.
I know.
But
Well,
once I
we're
could
so
stay
wired in a
regulated, I was
similar.
a human being again.
Yeah, we're so wired in a similar way. I call it that, and also going to 12 step is I matured in 12 step. I think the group therapy work was very healing for me, but I kind of really grew up in those ideas.
Mhm.
And I would learn, I think a lot of recovery is just learning healthier ideas from healthier people.
Yeah.
So I just think having a community or having people to bounce stuff off of. And then I love that victory you were talking about, because if I was in your shoes, there was a time in my life where I would go and become the mayor. You know what I mean? And like work, well, well, we got crisis, we got to work this out, just kind of take over. And in a way that people didn't need that from me. Like your guests, they didn't need an intervention. They didn't need someone to take over or get reactive or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, it makes me think about the part of me that like had to, and I'm sure you did too, of just had to make shit happen because the adults were out of control.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm actually grateful for my coping mechanism of being somebody who takes control of situations, and it, became a
Hmm.
nightmare later, but it sure got me through. I had to raise younger siblings and or help with that
Yes,
quite a bit.
right.
And then also that to put on a outward happy face too. Sometimes I
Yep.
second guess myself and go, well, maybe if I had appeared to have more significant problems, I would have gotten help. But I think at the time I grew up, not really. Um, but
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. So I appeared to have things together, and I made myself an attractive friend for, the girls who were my friends, and their parents would want me over. And and that was good.
Right.
That's like a survival strategy, like be a nice kid and you'll get to stay over there a lot. And I
Yep.
had to go over there for food, frankly, when I was under 10. I grew up with a lot
Jeez.
of hunger, it just wasn't together. My mom
Right.
was perfectly educated. It wasn't that.
Right.
It
I
was
went
the
to friends'
booze.
houses. I went to friends' houses for a reprieve, and everything that you're saying is so right on. Like we have to come up with these like fake selves, the
Mhm.
good kid, you know what I mean, or the
Mhm.
shy one, or the goofy one, or whatever.
Mhm.
And they really keep us alive. They really keep us going, or whether it's trying to get food and presenting a certain way,
Mhm.
or um, I just wanted peace, and I would go to my friend's house because they had more peaceful households.
Mhm.
But then I'd leave in a shame attack, knowing, you know what I mean, that I wasn't part of that family,
Yeah.
or like you just kind of. I think what sucks about this stuff, we always knew
Mhm.
in the back of our mind that we were coming from ratty families or messed up families,
Mhm.
and that what we didn't know is that sometimes the friends that we would seek peace or food from were going through their own stuff. So we
Yes.
also assumed it was all us. That's why I think community is so relieving, or what people in the comments just like, oh my God, my mom sounds like your mom. But when I was 12, I literally thought that I was the only kid on the planet that had those experiences.
You and your ex met 7 years ago, and you liked him, but you weren't sure how serious you were until you found him talking to other girls. So for you, it wasn't love, it was jealousy. And I totally understand with CPTSD, it can be really hard to know the difference between what is love and what is just like a hurt feeling that you feel jealous and you want this not to happen. And you'll use this whole thing of giving your heart or even your motherhood to somebody so that you don't have to feel jealous. But that's kind of what happened. And so first, I just want to lay the foundation and say it's totally understandable that you did that. But because you started this relationship without that sincerity and you have this very good self-awareness and insight. This is the tough love. What you were doing there, regardless of anything he did, we're not here to analyze him, and people are going to write in and go, what about the guy who's going to call him out? Not really me, because he didn't write to me. I'm helping Angie. Like, what can Angie do? And it's to first just like own that you made a trauma-driven decision in getting together with somebody you didn't love, but your jealousy was intense. And jealousy, sometimes it comes because we're getting into relationships with people who are not available, and I think that's what happened here. Also, sometimes we get jealous because we were never properly loved as kids, and that whole thing of attaching in a romantic way to another person activates that old wound where you were not cared for and nobody stood by you when you were little. Your parents' drama ate up all the oxygen in the room. You kids were left to overhear all these horrible fights and things. I'm so sorry that happened for you. So this jealousy thing, it's not very good information. Actually, it's not great information. It's trauma driven. Your CPTSD generated it, but it wasn't you thinking to yourself, this really is the right relationship for me. I'm going to get up on my toes and do my best to, work this relationship out. That's not where it came from. So you said when you saw him talking to other girls, it made you feel like I needed him. I wanted to be serious. And that's unhealthy, you say. And you began to feel super insecure, and the cycle began of insecurity, jealousy, resentment of him getting caught over and over and taking you back over and over. So because both of you were outcasts from families, you have a trauma bond. That's what you have. He betrays you, you throw him out, you take each other back, you try again and again and again. That's a trauma bond. And it's intermittent reinforcement. I do think a lot of people are going to say, how dare he cheat on you? But I'm like, you were never that into him. He was never that into you. There was a strong feeling there. It may have been like intense at first, but he was always sleeping with a lot of people. So if you didn't have CPTSD and you were able to date some perfect person, which none of us can, but if you could, you would have seen that first sign of behavior. The minute he was like talking to other girls, you would have been like, this guy's not available. And the reason we can't see it is because of CPTSD, and also because it kind of matches the way we're not available at stages of our life. And it might manifest in different ways. One way we manifest not being available is like latching on, clinging to relationships with somebody who's not available. So he had this constant pattern. He wasn't the guy who was in love with you and wanted to marry you and be with you and be faithful to you. That wasn't it. And then he went and got somebody pregnant and had a baby with her. And then out of spite and jealousy and hurt, not out of love. And I just got to say, this is not the greatest reason to have a child. It sounds like you weren't ready at all. You wanted to have a baby to hurt him, to claim your dignity, I think, after the indignity of having him go get somebody else pregnant. But I think in your mind, like outside forces or he was doing this to you. And what I do here is I help people who are hurt by trauma, who keep having a bad cycle in a relationship, just go, where did you make the decision to, commit to this relationship? And a kid is the biggest commitment you can make. Like whether he gets full measured in parenting or not, like you guys are connected forever. There's going to be this lifelong connection. And I bet you didn't know that when you had a kid. I had a kid as a single mom, and I had not, I feel like I should have known better, but I didn't. I didn't really get it. And I was trauma driven, but also it was also part of a good motive, and I'm sure it was in you. Like I just knew that I really wanted kids, and I was pregnant, and there it was. So I moved forward, and I'm really glad I did. Like it all worked out, but I had a lot of the challenges you have. It was hard. It was hard to manage the relationship with my kid's dad. We had 2 kids. And it didn't work out, but we were able to skip over all this like rancor at the end. It was hard at first. And I will tell you about this. He and I made a course. It's not really part of Crappy Childhood Fairy, but I will put a link to it down below. It's called Positive Shared Custody, and it's for people in exactly your situation where you're not a couple with the other parent, but you need to work out a positive thing that's good for the kid and happy for everybody. So that link is going to be below, but stay with me here. I just want to talk about what you're going through, okay? So then you had the baby, and the other girl cut him off, and when he didn't choose to be with her. So she obviously had a little less trauma than you, and she could see that for what it was. You cut a guy off when he does that. But you know what? Now, once you have a baby, there's this huge motivation to keep a good relationship with the baby's other parent. So good on you. You tried to do that. It seemed to get better during pregnancy, but he was still cheating, and you didn't leave. And that's what people do during pregnancy. You just kind of deal with what you have to deal with because you're vulnerable. You're going to need help. It would take an incredible, audacious courage to break up with somebody in the middle of pregnancy. It can be done, but I don't know if you had the family support to make that seem like a good option to you. I totally understand. I knew he was lying, but I chose to believe his lies. We never lived together. He made me believe it was best to keep separate houses. Okay, you never lived together, and he made you believe it was best. But here also, and again, like, I'm here to help you, like, reclaim your power from this situation. And what I see here is a little bit, you still are endowing him with all the power by which your life is going to be good or bad. But you actually have that power. And part of how you're going to realize that is just to say, no one can make you believe that. You know that living in a separate house from somebody who you're raising a child with and who's technically your partner, you know that living in a house is a very significant deviation from what people normally do. And it usually means somebody does not want to be sexually monogamous. It might not mean that, but you chose to believe his lies. He'd been cheating before. I know that you knew in your heart what was going on. And I also understand if you decided to just kind of be okay with it for the time being so that you could have his help and participation while you were in the most vulnerable and difficult part of raising a child, which is the early, like the first year, and it gradually gets easier. So fast forward to when your son was 2 and you say, I popped in early one morning and found him in bed with another girl. So popping in early on the guy, I think that was your good intuition, just wanting to not be lied to and just know, right? You already knew. You knew, you saw confirmation. Yeah, he was sleeping with other people. So he was not somebody who could make a commitment to anybody, it's clear. And his behavior is pretty much frowned upon by society everywhere. Getting women pregnant, not really showing up to care for them, not being honest with them, not doing his share. It's crappy behavior. I totally get that. I do not approve. But again, we're going to come back to how do we help you now? What do you do now? Because he is who he is, and he's not your partner anymore. And I don't think he's ever going to be. I think that's like 100% clear. So what you're dealing with now is this attachment to him and this bitterness towards him and feeling like it ought to have turned out differently. And that's what we do, but I want to help you let that go. I want to help you let go of the fantasy of a hypothetical reality where he was not who he was and you were not who you were. And if you were not the person who got together with a cheater, you wouldn't have been with him. This is not who you would have had a kid with. But here you are, you have this kid. I bet you love your kid. You're here. And now it's time to make the best of it. And isn't it beautiful how life can create whole new human beings and bring our lives forward a whole chapter, even though all of this is being formed out of our brokenness. And that's often how I look at my kids. They're so wonderful. They're such a joy in my life. And it was hard. And having kids, when I did and how I did, it came out of like one of the hardest periods of my life, and I didn't know what I was doing. And yet it turned out as a great gift. And I really want you to have that too. And whether for people watching, like maybe it's not kids for you, maybe it's your happiness, maybe it's the place where you get to finally live as your home, all of these things. Like sometimes life works with us. We get to have great adventures. We get to find love. We get to come home one day, to a more stable life, even though we have CPTSD and we make these decisions now before we know how to do this. So, but you are learning, and you're 32, and you asked me, and I want to help you. Like, I just love the thought that I can help people who are at an earlier stage of life. When I was your age, well, it was 2 years before I embarked on my kid journey. So, so all of that, I had high hopes. I still hoped at that time I was going to, have the really normal path, but I couldn't put together the normal path because I had CPTSD. And it kept sort of guiding me towards relationships that couldn't be that. And I didn't know how to not do that. I learned later. And everything I'm telling you is from what I've learned. So this is kind of if I could do it differently, right? If I could go back in time and do it, I'd do what I'm telling you. Okay. So you had a physical fight with him about finding him with another girl. And I guess if it was your understanding that you were in a monogamous relationship in 2 different houses, I can understand you being so upset. But when you physically fight with somebody, you're crossing a line that's very hard to come back from. And so first of all, Angie, I want you to really, really take that seriously. And I want you to go into your heart and get all the support you need to make a decision that you will never, ever strike another person, and you will never, ever stay in a situation where someone strikes you. In this situation, because you sprang up on him, you came into the situation. He wasn't being honest. He was hurting you, but you brought that drama into the room. And so the good news about that is it means that you have the power to not make those decisions anymore. If you've been in violent relationships in the past, it can be really hard to change the pattern. So I just, again, put your top priority. Your top priority is never to have a violent interaction again, unless you are defending yourself against somebody who's attacking you, which happens randomly. But I don't want you ever in a relationship with somebody who does that. If they do that, you never see them again. No more violence. You're a mom. Moms must not have that. And it happens. It happens. But when you're ready to heal, you're going to draw the bright red line on that. No more. Okay? So then he begged for you to forgive him. So I guess he liked having you as kind of his main partner, but he wanted to have other ones and he knew you wouldn't accept it. So he lied. And you put your foot down hoping he would chase you, and he didn't. And now he's still with this person 3 years later. So in a way, I feel like that was an evolution for him. I don't know, maybe he cheats on her too. Maybe she's okay with it. I don't know. I'm not really trying to help him here. I'm trying to help you. So he's moved on. That is what happened. He moved on, and he's in a relationship that's more stable. And I hope, for the sake of your son and for him and for the woman he's with, that he's in a better place now. I do hope so, but it's none of our business anymore. Did you know that? It's just like, it's not your business anymore who he sleeps with. It is your business what your kid is exposed to. But I'm going to talk about that now. So it's been 3 years, and he's still with her. And he's a semi-active father. Okay, that's something. It's not ideal. It's not, half and half. He works in the entertainment industry and is trying to get ahead, and it keeps him from seeing his son consistently. He barely calls him, and now he's moved the girlfriend into the house. I really, really want all dads, all parents who are not the primary custodial parent, to be the best parent they can and to be involved as they can. That is positively the best thing for the kid, as long as there's not a whole bunch of drama between the parents. So when there's going to be fist fights and screaming and name calling and threats and manipulative maneuvers of saying he can't spend the night, then a smart person has to find a way to set a boundary. And what I don't totally get is why you two haven't gone to, because, there's like county, state government supports for people who are separated parents. They will help sort out the custody thing. And a father is entitled, assuming you're in my country, the US, a father is entitled to 50% custody unless there's some terrible case that can be made that he shouldn't have it. Now, not everybody asks for 50%. And so normally what the deal is whoever has less than 50%, then they do a calculation to see if child support needs to be paid. When I got divorced, we made about the same amount of money. We really committed to the kids having a strong relationship with each of us, 50-50, and we did that. And we were super cooperative with each other so that the kids, we could minimize how much stress and fear and hurt that they went through because of our split. My older son was 4 when we split up, and he was the younger one. He was only 1, and I'm sure he felt it. He couldn't articulate it, but the older one was devastated. And for 2 or 3 years, he was very upset at the idea that either one of us would move on and find somebody new. He was holding out hope that we would get back together and be married. And it was so heartbreaking and so natural for a child to want that. Kids need to feel that their parents are okay. It is terrifying to be a kid and see your parent breaking down and freaking out. And for this reason, your mental health and your emotional health is so important. It's so important to take care of yourself and get the support that you need to be okay, to actually be okay, so that your son can see you. Your son will interpret reality by looking at you like, are we okay? Is this situation okay? This doesn't look like those other people's family. Is our family okay? And no matter what you say, your kids are going to feel. You can lie to kids. You were lied to, I bet. You can lie to them and say, oh yeah, everything's fine. But you're freaking out. But everything depends on healing so much that you're not freaking out, that you are confident, that you are doing what you need to do to have a good life. And I can tell you're precarious here because you're living in a bedroom with your mom. And I'd say you have about 2 years to get that sorted out. Because by the time he's 7, I think that's a little too old to be sharing a room with his mom. It might be necessary for survival. That I understand. But what I see is you're 32, you have a kid, now he's school age. This is your chance to get totally focused on becoming self-supporting and not needing to live in your mom's house and share a room with your kid, but to be able to have your own apartment, even if it's small, but to start having appropriate boundaries for a boy who's growing up so that he doesn't end up all enmeshed with his mom. Now, I'm super tight with my kids, and I was very close to them, and I totally would have done what you're doing. But my experience is at about 7, they become their own people, and they need their own space for sleeping. And starting right now, starting like today, you need to start having peace in your heart so that you can vibe that to your son. So how are you going to do that, right? So you said he's semi-active dad, and you're so jealous and angry because for 3 years he's been with this woman who's now sleeping in this bed that you used to share with him, with your son. So I understand the jealousy that you wanted that, but I'm going to point out again, this is not somebody you ever loved. I don't think he was ever the right person for you. And isn't that cool how in life you can still have a baby even when you're with the utterly wrong person? And then you have to work things out on a practical level as parents. That's the right thing to do. So the right thing to do here, it's been 3 years. It is time to accept that he's in a new relationship. That's who he lives with. And in fact, as your son's dad, him being in a committed relationship and having an extra parent, step parent around the house, or I don't know if step parent is too strong a word if they're not married, but she's bathing him, you said. So that freaked you out, but I think it freaked you out of jealousy rather than well-being. What's best for your kid, generally speaking, is to have a really good relationship with both parents. And one of the worst things you can do to a kid is to try to undermine the child's relationship with their parent. And I know you know that, but you're writing to me, and I'm just going to say it like definitively. You want your kid to have the best possible relationship, and the exception would be if the parent is abusive. And you're not telling me anything to indicate that he is. And so, whatever his lifestyle is, if he works a lot, if he's polyamorous or whatever, what matters is that he's being a good and solid dad, and he's shielding your child from any drama in his life, and that he's not undermining your relationship with him. Because after 3 years, I think if you can't control your rage and you can't stop the destructive impulse, then your feelings about this have become the problem. That is the problem. I have some friends, I have quite a number of people who write to me, and they're in a partnership with somebody who has an ex who continues to try to attack and undermine and poison. And it's a terrible, terrible thing to do. It is abuse. It's psychological and emotional abuse, and it will affect children. And it's a sure way to make your life miserable. So you were saying, I know I should stop, but I don't know how. And I'm just going to say, oh, yes, you do. You know how to stop. What you have to make a decision is whether you're going to give yourself the support that you need to stick with stopping. Stopping is right. All you have to do is stop. You can will yourself. And again, I'm going to point you to this course. It's not Crappy Childhood Fairy, but it's a course that my ex and I made. He's a family law attorney. Boy, was that scary back when we were splitting up, because when we would argue and, be processing our divorce, when he got really mad, he'd sort of go, you do that, you'll never see the kids again. And he actually could make it happen, or in theory, make it happen. But I was a good mom. It didn't happen. And in the end, we cooperated really beautifully. And I'm so proud of us for being able to do that. I want you to have the same thing. It's okay that the couple thing doesn't work out. In fact, when that thing is not meant to be, it's the best thing in the world for it to break up, because now it's the drama can stop. And you have the opportunity to heal. Yeah, it sounds like it's too soon right now, that you need to heal your trauma, but someday you can be in a new partnership. One thing I did when it was quite a while before I got into a new relationship, I dated. When I started dating the man who's now my husband and became my kid's stepdad, he did not meet them for a year. So that's what I just want to kind of model for you, is protecting kids from our personal CPTSD-driven drama is of paramount importance. And you can create those workarounds by just saying the kids are not going to meet this person, they're not going to stay over. Only if it's a serious, committed relationship would it become that. And to the best of your ability, I know that's may not be possible in every situation, but just commit that your child isn't going to see you in conflict with his dad, and you will never talk smack about his dad. So that's what to do. There's things that you can say. When my kids were older, they asked me about something about their dad that was something I had a negative opinion about. And they said, is it true that da 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 da? And I said, I've heard that, but I don't know. And that way I didn't gaslight them, but I also didn't validate this bad thing that I didn't know if they knew or should know, you know? So it can be a fine line to walk sometime, but I felt like that was a pretty good answer to deal with it. And they actually have a really good relationship with their dad. Their dad has remarried a woman I love and respect, who's been a lovely person in their life. And I've just been able, by healing my trauma, I was able to feel good about her even before I met my person. And then I have my person. Everybody really supports each other. We really got our head around the primary importance of living in such a way that was helpful to the kid. So here's the thing, even if people watching, if you don't have kids, they're very important, but they're also like a little like barometer of like, how am I doing? And so the things that you do to take care of a child and keep their life happy always has the same benefit for yourself. So if you're not a parent and you're having these kind of cycle of high drama relationships, you can ask yourself, what would I do if there were a child involved? And do that, because there is a child involved. It's you. It's your fragile self who went through what it is, went through what you did. And so when you act according to that, I need to have peace. I need to have cooperation. And when there's no child involved, you get to completely cut ties. And that is often the best thing to do with a terrible, tumultuous relationship. It really hurts when you're doing it. When you have abandonment wounds, it will feel like you're going to die. And that's why I say support yourself. Become willing to support yourself. And how you do that is with 12-step programs. It might be therapy. It might be group counseling. There's stuff for single moms. There's so many support systems. The wonderful thing is there are so many support systems out there, and many of them don't cost anything. And I think you don't have the money to do like therapy that you pay for. You can come do my daily practice. We do free calls. There's so much like good stuff that's free on my website. You can do that. But 12-step programs, they're fantastic. And somehow I have a feeling that either you have some substance stuff or you were affected by people who did. And that means you qualify for Al-Anon, you qualify for ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Other Dysfunctional Families. And so, yay, maybe Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. Don't let the name scare you. It's for people who get messed up in relationships. So that could be a wonderful thing for you. And then you can get on your feet when you have less drama and more joy and more support and friends and love in your life, then you can get on your feet financially. I can't say enough about how important that is. I think it's overlooked. I think a lot of the people who create literature for traumatized people, like maybe they weren't so close to the edge of poverty as some of us were, and that as a single mom, it is so important to have that financial house in order. And hopefully because your ex is, got this career, he's going to be able to contribute financially in a way that's helpful. That's, you get to go to court for that, and that's required. So hopefully you'll do that. But completely exit the drama. Just exit the drama right now. A good, harmonious relationship with him is the best thing you can do for yourself and your kid. So you said your son is older and he's starting to understand and hear things. So this is your cue. This is when you wrote to me. Good job. You don't want your ex's girlfriend around your son when he doesn't even spend real solo time with him. So I'm suggesting you let go of that goal. That's actually not best for your son. What's best for your son is that he has a good and unobstructed relationship with your dad. Again, when there's not abuse in the situation and your child's not being, neglected, like, left outside or not taken to the emergency room if he needs stitches, that would be neglect. If he's just kind of like a funky person who makes some mistakes and is imperfect but not abusive, then you just want to get out of the way and let your ex have his own relationship with your son. It's really important for kids to have a relationship with both parents. And kids who don't have that suffer. So you want him to have that, and you need to let your ex parent in his own style, in the way that works for him. And he is in a big partnership where they live together. And presumably his partner has agreed to help in childcare. So this is actually a good thing because you are a two-household family now. You're still a family, you're still raising a kid together, but it's two households. So it's time for you to use that time when your son is with his dad to go take care of yourself and go start healing those emotions that would have you fighting to keep a guy who mistreated you, who you were never that into, so that you can cooperate with him in having a harmonious two-household family. So you say, what can I do to get to a place of indifference? And I would say indifference is not really the goal. You don't want to not care. You want to be supportive. You actually want to be happy for your son to have a good relationship with his dad, and however his dad's family sort of grows over the years. Maybe he's going to have more children. I don't know. Your son will always be part of that family too. And you want that. That's a good thing. That's a strong thing in his life. I want to move on, you say, but it's hard when I'm constantly reminded of the pain dealing with him and his girlfriend. So it's painful to you because you're attached to an idea of something that does not exist, and in fact, it never existed. This guy never was your die-hard, committed, monogamous dude. That's never who he was. There were always problems. And so you have an attachment to a fantasy you had, and you can't make it be real, and you're mad at him that he can't make it be real. And there's an easier way to look at this, and in time it's going to be easier to see this. It just is what it is. It's a kind of stitched together, cobbled together relationship family that a new person came out of. So that's a wonderful thing. There's this little boy, and this relationship was not the one. You can do better, and you can do better when you heal this trauma inside, and you become a woman who's no longer entangled with the emotions of the past. If you've seen some of my other videos about cab light, people who have a big dramatic entanglement with an ex are not good partners, and no healthy person will want to date you if they know that's going on. I don't mean to scare you, but it's just reality. If you're ready for a good relationship, it's just time to clear that up. Start supporting, accepting, and then keeping a vigilant eye and making sure your son is well cared for. But do not interfere with your ex's relationship with his girlfriend or the way he would like to parent, unless you have a reason to think it's abuse. And if you do, then what you do is you call the Child Protective Services. You don't try to, do it yourself unless it's an emergency. But again, I just don't think that's what's going on. This sounds like it's a lot of your childhood trauma keeping you in pain and keeping you trying to get that healing out of a thing that doesn't have it for you. It just doesn't have it. You do get to heal, and you do get to have comfort. I would really recommend, come learn my daily practice techniques. They are so comforting. And when you're freaking out and you feel alone and all these feelings are coming up and you feel like you're going to yell or you're going to make a phone call you regret, then you can just sit down and you can write your fears and resentments on paper and ask for them to be removed, and then take a nice healing rest. And this is a very specific technique. I teach it in a class that's called the Daily Practice. It's free. You can learn and try it in less than an hour. It's always linked on the free tools page of my website, and that free tools page is always linked down in the description below all my videos. So check it out. There is comfort available for you, and it's comfort that's reliable and that doesn't have terrible consequences of messing up your relationships or your parenting. The last thing you told me is that you said, ashamedly, I've told him as long as he's with her, I will always raise an issue for him to deal with. So you know what you can do? You can work that through, and you can go talk to him and apologize for that and say, I'm sorry I was reacting. I'm not going to do that. I want you to be successful as a parent with him, and I want us to work together for the good of our little guy. That's a really good thing to do. It's always okay to apologize, and I have a feeling your apology will be accepted, and hopefully all the adults involved will all want the same thing. So good luck. This is so important. Good job reaching out,